Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium Board meeting. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd. We are at the Akron Urban League. Welcome to everyone, and we will start with introductions. I'm Grace Scallucci. I'm the chair of NEOSCC as well as the executive director for NOACA.
I'm Hunter Morrison, the executive director of NEOSCC.
Steve Hambley, Medina County Commissioner representing NOACA.
Rachel McCartney with Eastgate Regional Council of Governments.
John Getchie with Eastgate.
Joe Hadley with NEFCO.
Gene Nixon, Summit County Public Health.
Jason Segedy with AMADS. Jeff Duck with SCATS.
Greg Brown, Policy Bridge.
Mike Lyons, RPI.
Becky Ebert, the Fund for Academic Future.
Janice Schweitzer, Ashtabula County.
Mike Challenger, Lorraine County.
Ron Shortis, Youngstown State University.
Anna Diaz-Senes, Mahoney County Commissioners.
Mark Lefkowitz with Queens Union District.
Kelly Harris.
Jared, Cuyahoga County.
Great. Do we have any local officials? Any public comment? No one signed in? Okay. First action item is the approval of the meeting minutes for June 27th, 2013. Do we have
I looked at the minutes and I may be just losing my mind. I don't remember David Pitt doing his presentation as part of the board. I remember it as part of the executive committee. I'm just thinking, it looks like it was in our minutes for the board meeting, but I don't.
But he did make comments. He did make comments.
Yeah, and maybe I just read it wrong. It just looked like it was a summary of what happened at the executive committee. Mr. Fitz noted that some of the challenges, we didn't go over that. We went over it in the executive committee. Am I mistaken?
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to. I'm trying to remember.
That was all. It does not matter that much.
It's just a reiteration of what happened in the EC so that the board can know what was going on because they were not present during the executive committee meeting.
So how about if we just note that that's a summary from the executive committee for the board? And then with that change, can I have a motion to adopt?
Move approval with that change.
Do I have a second? Second, Mike Lyons. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We have a very big agenda today, so we'll keep moving along. For discussion, we have the Regional AI FHEA report, and that's West Consulting.
Hi. Test 1, 2.
Here, take this one for this second. I'll flip these along.
Hi. I'm not Rob Godin from Western Economic Services, as everyone knows. I'm Anthony Kobach, project manager with NEOSCC in the Housing and Communities Workstream. I wanted to introduce Rob, but before I do, one thing with this important work that's integrated into the Vibrant NEO 2040 planning process, Shelley Potacci, who's now the former director of Housing and Sustainable Housing and Communities, really the boss of our grant process, sent a letter that just said, kind of summarized her 4 years working with HUD before she moved on. And I just wanted to note one part. She said, I have many thoughts of my proudest accomplishments, but what she lists like 3 or 4 of them, but in that, one of them is making access to opportunity and equity a centerpiece of sustainable communities. And the regional analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and the fair housing equity assessment, very long title, is a centerpiece or an answer to our equity component of our scenario planning process. Rob Godin has been doing, he's the Director of Research at Western Economic Services based out of Portland, Oregon. Many of you know of him from the past. He has done analysis of impediments for communities up into the largest areas of states and multi-jurisdictional counties like ourselves. We've been at this together in a partnership for about 9 months now. We're heading into the last month. The plan will be finished by late October and then be fed into the larger scenario planning and the Vibrant NEO 2040 plan. So with that, let me turn it over to Rob. He'll go through about a 20-minute presentation about all the work we've been doing to this point, and then we'll open it up for Q&A afterwards. And with that, let me turn it over to Rob. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back once again. I know the agenda is tight. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. But I do want to touch on two things. We are going to talk about something called a fair housing equity assessment. And that is a requirement of the kind of grant that you have received. Their recommendations and the guidance they've had thus far, really kind of a 6-step type of process. Give you demographic information, fair housing background, talk about segregation and integration in the region, concentrations of poverty, disparity, and access to opportunity. Kind of talk about the fair housing infrastructure, how well it's working, and so on, as well as investments that you've made in the public physical infrastructure. Now, I'm not going to go into great details with those things, but those are a set of requirements. At the same time, each of the entitlement jurisdictions, those entities that get funding directly from HUD through CDBG and HOME and ESG and HAPA, have for the last 20 years conducted a very similar study called the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. What this involves is really taking a look at both private sector and public sector housing transactions, giving us some idea how well those transactions, how that market's working. Really, we're looking to assess whether there are barriers to housing choice. Oddly enough, just this past Friday, HUD issued new guidance on this, quote, AI. Actually, it eliminated it. It kind of blended both the FHEA, the Fair Housing and Equity Assessment, and the Analysis of Impediments to one new process. There's a 60-day comment period. This assessment of fair housing really has the same requirements that we have just completed. Identifying racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, measuring other types of isolation, evaluating access to opportunity, ways which we might be able to reduce social and economic disparities, as well as still identifying impediments and recommending actions. So these entitlements have to do it, and these new guidelines also call upon PHAs to follow the same process. The funny part, they actually even put deadlines. You have to do this 270 days prior to the start of your program year, or your program year gets delayed. So it's now they also have a little bigger hammer in doing the process. But when I read these kind of new guidelines, what I see is what we have done for you essentially has pioneered this process. But what I would like to do is to kind of walk quickly through this, show you what's in there, or at least what's on the surface of what's in there, so you have some idea about what this means and where we can use it with our process here. One of the things we wanted to look at was our spatial distribution of poverty. Here we have a couple of maps that look at poverty in 2000 and poverty in 2010. Overall, poverty has increased a little bit, but what I'm believing we see here is that we have increasing concentrations of poverty in particular areas of the entire region. When we look at spatial distribution of selected minorities, here I have blacks and the next slide Hispanics, we find a similar kind of concentration. While there is some ebbing in concentration, region-wide, certain areas have increasing concentrations of, in this case, of blacks. A similar situation is occurring with Hispanics. We have increasing concentrations. In this new type of approach, this fair housing equity assessment, soon to be called an assessment of fair housing, we really need to begin to look at the combination of these two types of concepts, concentrations of poverty and racial and ethnic concentrations. Those go together as something called RCAPs, racially concentrated areas of poverty, and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And here we just have a map that shows these particular areas throughout the entire region. More RCAP census tracts than ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. But this type of study calls upon you to make a choice. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to make investments? How can we help these areas graduate from these long-established patterns and move more towards more highly integrated, perhaps as well, areas that have some opportunity? Do we wish to mitigate or eliminate? Would these also be investment targets? How might we enhance access to opportunity? You know, over time, things are changing. This study calls for us also to look at kind of segregation indexes. And here I have comparison between these indexes between 2000 and one of the indexes between 2000 and 2010. This is the dissimilarity index. It's a quantitative measure of whether the community is segregated or not, and it's just by county. The guideline HUD offers are low levels, moderate levels, or high. Notice that 2000 was more highly segregated than 2010. So we're moving in the right direction. That's a good thing. But you know, we talk about areas of opportunity. Opportunities are created out of investment patterns. These two maps show us small business lending, the number of loans made over a 12-year period, and the volume of loans made over a 12-year period. The darker colors have the higher levels of lending. Notice the kind of the bandwidth about which these are occurring in certain areas, basically outside of our urbanized areas. We've created areas of opportunity outside our urbanized core. When we look at our areas of opportunity, we want to have them connect somehow with the transportation system that we've built. These areas we just saw, they weren't necessarily correlating well with this. You know, there are areas that have high quality transit within this grid map, but the study calls upon us to think about these RCAP, ECAP areas and do something about it. It also calls upon us to try to decide, well, we have problem areas, don't we also have areas that are of high quality? They're great neighborhoods, they're good jobs, they're good schools, there's lots of grocery stores, they're safe. This is a quantitative measure of opportunity. It's a place, it's a thing, it's a geographic area. We created an index of a variety of measures like school graduation rates and economic opportunity and jobs, high quality transit in each census tract. When we blended all the different measures of these different things into a single index, the opportunity index, we see kind of where opportunity is lying. So again, suggesting areas of investment. The RCAPs, ECAPs, and these are diametrically opposed. So we have two sets of problems. Opening access for people in lower income areas to get to these areas of higher opportunity, as well as perhaps changing the complexion of the RCAP and ECAP areas, making them perhaps a little more economically vibrant. So this is really where our problem lies. How do we get from these kind of quantitative concepts and making investment choices? What we find in the Fair Housing Equity Assessment summary, we have concentrations of racial and ethnic minorities, areas with significant poverty over time. It kind of persists. High levels of segregation in selected areas of the region, and areas that have lacked investment and others that have gotten significant levels of investment. particularly kind of, if you will, inequitable distribution of our Community Reinvestment Act resources. That was small business lending. It kind of calls us out a little bit on how we have chosen our public investments in the past. You know, those public infrastructure, housing, and various other types of investments. How might we better arrange them so they can present opportunities for others? Just to kind of highlight some of our public policy choices of the past, I've also downloaded some data from HUD's website, HUD multifamily housing and low-income housing tax credit data, just to show the distributions. Again, where we have placed these have been in areas that are typified by high concentrations of poverty, as well as racial and ethnic concentrations. At the beginning of this process, I had asked all the housing authorities in the region to provide public housing and voucher data. I see from the new proposed rules that HUD will now be providing that publicly for all these new assessment of fair housing. They also provided this for us in this study. And what we see is that the brick and mortar is many times placed in areas of higher concentrations. And the use of vouchers typically has also concentrated in similar areas. You know, there are some things we might be able to consider doing on that. We also looked at some housing complaint data received from various agencies. There's a lot of fair housing infrastructure in this region, and I've just taken HUD's complaint data at this time. A lot of complaints over the years. The top three, disability, race, and familial status, are the same as what we see nationally in that exact order. What is really evident here is that complaints are dealing with the rental markets. We have flaws in that. Top 10 issues. Well, there's a lot of other issues. Nevertheless, it's rental, rental, as well as refusal to make reasonable accommodation for our disabled citizens. Difficulties in our marketplace. We also took a look at lending patterns. You know, there are geographic maps to show in the documents to show where these lending patterns kind of have problems. Really kind of correlates also with high concentration of poverty and racial and ethnic minorities. But we see it just in a simple table. Who gets denied a loan most often? 1 out of 3 blacks. Hispanic versus non-Hispanic. Hispanic are also denied more often throughout the entire region. It varies significantly from county to county. I will grant you that. If we simply look at high annual percentage rate loans, and starting in 2004, this Home Mortgage Disclosure Act began disclosing the interest rates on the loan if they exceeded the comparable Treasury security at the time the loan was made. Nearly 40% of blacks who actually got a loan got a predatory style loan. It's also higher for Hispanics than non-Hispanics. These are all problems. You know, what we came down with in this is a list of things that we saw as impediments to fair housing choice. Right? We're trying to conduct a fair housing equity assessment as well as look at the impediments for the 22 entitlement communities. We certainly see denial of available housing in the rental markets, discriminatory terms, failure to make reasonable accommodations, steering activities, preferences seen in advertising, and denial of available housing in some of the home purchase markets. These were derived from not just the quantitative data, but also from a survey which we conducted. In general, the kind of things I'm recommending to mitigate or overcome these relate to training, outreach, education, some testing and enforcement. But there are 10 issues related to the private sector. Certainly items 8 and 9 regarding home mortgage lending is a problem, and lack of compliance with some construction. Each of these things can be better addressed through a little more outreach, education, training, testing, and enforcement. We also took a look at public sector issues. You know, this series, these few slides here, reflect some input we received during the public input meetings. So that language is not exactly, this language is not exactly as what you see in the draft report. But what we have encountered, that some units of local government really lack, you know, a strong or lack of policies at all that might affirmatively further fair housing. You know, we also see a lack of fair housing outreach and education. There's a tremendously large fair housing infrastructure here, but you know what? I don't think it's as well coordinated perhaps as it could be. There's certainly, the problem seems to be a little bit larger than the resources that have been devoted to it in the past. We also have seen some land use and planning decisions, some practices occasionally not addressing as well as it could, you know, access to government services, particularly related to transportation. Also, if you read some of the various history books about policies that establish some initial types of segregation, these things have carried over into today. You know, we want to overcome each of those kinds of things. Even public policy decisions regarding definitions of family or disabled and things like that, it's very inconsistent throughout the region. You know, having more uniformity, I think, would be to a significant advantage. And also, the lack of sufficient inclusionary policies for development. Oftentimes, certain types of housing is kind of left out of the mix. All of these things we're really talking about and enhancing some coordination efforts. Really, certainly we want outreach and education, but we can have some guide for our units of local government to bring more uniformity to that process. Nevertheless, the idea is for us to be able to move forward as a single unit rather than so many disparate types of communities. I hope I have kept it to a reasonable length, but this is where we're at with this. I think Anthony has a couple of last comments to make, after which I'd be happy to answer any questions, make any clarifications on this brief presentation, but I want to thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, before we have any, or if we have any questions, I just wanted to bring up a couple of quick points, which brings us to this next slide of bridging the AI and FHEA from the findings that Rob went through to informing decision-making prior to prioritization and or investments. I gotta put this down. One thing that Steve Cerny from HUD will look at is three things. One is, did we do the FHEA product? Here's the FHEA product. Not to scare anyone, but it's a lot of tables and maps behind the report. The report is fairly this large. This is volume 1. Volume 2 is on the front part of this. Volume 3 are the tables that kind of create those maps. All of this will be in digital format for everyone to use. And some of the communities that are board members here actually complete an AI themselves. So you could either opt in and use this work and save staff time and money to use it as your own AI, if the timing works out right that you have to do one this year. Extend the life of your AI if it's not due yet, or you can opt out and ignore it completely, or use it to augment some more detailed work that you want to do at the local level. So those are the choices. Not to read anything more, I hate to read as a presenter, but on the HUD website, I believe this sentence never existed before NEOSCC engaged HUD to find out, can we use the FHEA regional AI to benefit our local communities? Yes, it's going to benefit the grant process and our region in general, but how does it benefit the local communities? And HUD has written on their website, for local community development block grant and home entitlement communities, and if you are those people, you know what that means. For the people that don't, it doesn't apply to you. Opting into the regional AI will allow them to forego submitting their own AI. It's a simple sentence, but it was a lot of coordination, a lot of commitment on HUD, which as people that work with HUD, they're not very committal sometimes. They keep things vague. Sorry if there's HUD people in the room. But that's exciting for this process. The other thing to remember on this bridging component is, so the grant has to promote, or actually you have to produce the product, the FHEA product. Then you have to engage the board, which we're doing today. And we can document that. And we've been through the process. We've given presentations before, and it will continue as Rob leaves, our planning process continues. But the bridge piece is really where this discussion really gets exciting and interesting is, and HUD has this in their documentation, for final certification of our planning process, we have to have a bridge, which is a discussion from what our findings are, how, in what way, shape, or form do they inform decision making, prioritization, or investments. How does this happen? HUD doesn't give any guidelines, which is good because each community is unique. One thing they use as an example is maybe as our board we could say we're going to make a commitment to have a percentage decrease in racially concentrated areas of poverty over a time period. And that map back there, they're small pieces, but they're the areas that really aren't the areas of opportunity. Do we change that and create those areas of opportunities there? Do we try to connect transit to have people connect to the areas of opportunities, which are mainly translation jobs? I'm not sure. I want to kick it back over to Rob to answer any questions, and if we don't have any at this time, we'll still continue with the process, throughout the end of the year with scenario planning as well. Yes, Grace.
Anthony, how many member communities did you say need to perform their own AI?
That's 22, 18 cities and 4 counties.
Right. So we have a potential of cost savings for those 22 communities who do not have to do their own this year.
That is that's true. In the proposed guidelines, it is being encouraged. The website that Anthony quoted from, it said it's not being encouraged, but the proposed rules, a regional approach to addressing fair housing is being encouraged.
And if we're talking about typical AI studies costing about $25,000 for a community, upwards. So we're looking at anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million in savings that this organization, this grant, has encouraged through this process. And that's a tremendous, I think, savings to the taxpayer that we ought to make sure is recognized in addition to the overall good work that we have done together.
Or at least delayed funding that's going to be used to this, or, like I said, augmenting existing data.
Sure.
You might want to, you might still spend some money, but probably much less than you would have.
Is it clear for those communities, you said some communities have opted in, some have not, and I know, Pam, I don't know where you all are, if there are other folks in the room who are using it. Is it clear why those who have not opted in have not done so? Is it something that we could improve upon if we did this in the future? Is it just a desire to have local control, or?
Two comments real quick, and then Rob, I don't know if you had a comment. When you mentioned about Pam, there are the housing authorities who also are beyond the 22 entitlement communities that have to either do an AI themselves or certify that they're linking with their community to affirmatively furthering fair housing. So I equate it to, and not in a bad way, is it's like, can you have a root canal or choose not to have a root canal? I mean, it's very important work. The joke is that it's very complex, very complicated. It's like, would I do this or not do it? I'd rather just link with my community. So that's what the housing authorities do. Of the 15 housing authorities in our region, none of them do their own AI.
Okay.
they all connect with other
So
organizations.
then those entitlement communities do the AI?
Yes, and then the entitlement communities, ones that have opted out, like one, if they haven't changed their mind yet, Lake County said, this is nice, but we're happy with our version, and we're not at that time like City of Cleveland has, and City of Youngstown, their AIs are due this year.
Yep.
And we've partnered with all of them through the process. Some have been more engaged than others. But as far as convincing them or how can we do things differently,
It would be interesting to understand, I don't know at what points you engaged them and whether it was upfront and they knew all along they wouldn't use it. But if, as we think about what value we have going forward in a regional coordination capacity, it might be helpful to understand whether those counties who have opted in would like this sort of cooperation to continue, and therefore what sort of infrastructure is needed to do that. And secondly, for those entitlement communities that have chosen not to opt in, if it's something that when theirs comes due, they would be interested and it needs to be organized, the timing needs to be organized, or if this didn't include something that they would need and didn't have to supplement it, or what those reasons are. And so whether, if we do this again, if we can improve the use of it.
And to be clear, at this point, there isn't any community that's opted in or opted out. My understanding is they have the option to use this or not use this.
correct. I'd use this wording of opting in, there's no real form. to
Right. But at this point, it isn't that communities have opted in or out, so it's too late for them to engage.
Right.
We've engaged them all in the process. We've covered all of the area within the 12-county region, and at this point, they can opt to use it or opt not to use it. So to that end, I think we ought to make sure that all of those communities are aware, again, of what we've done, and make sure that we're highlighting the advantages of using our study, particularly the financial advantage, as well as being part of the overall perspective of the group. And then, of course, to Ms. Burke's point, if they choose to opt out, just trying to understand a bit more why they have, so that way in the future, should we choose to do this together as an organization or as a consortium, we would have better insight into improving it.
I can offer a little commentary about your initial reaction. Several of the entitlements about 6 or 7 years ago, those in Cuyahoga County tried to do a regional AI for the county. Okay, and that did not go well with HUD because HUD didn't approve it prior. So we spent a long time waiting to get a commitment from HUD saying, yes, this process will work and we'll let you off the hook if you join. So that was part of it. And I have experience with other regional AIs, and the way that is structured is the participants establish a fiscal agent and they sign mutual contracts with the fiscal agent, and then they contribute something to the fiscal agent, significantly less than they would do otherwise, and the fiscal agent then contracts or does certain types of activities, outreach and education testing, region-wide. And it's a very cost-effective approach.
But again, I think that we need to understand for those who do opt out, what are the reasons that they've opted out. Particularly, I know that there might have been some communities that questioned some of the approach or the data that went into this process, so that if we choose to do this in the future, we can improve the approach.
As an entitlement community, I will tell you that one of the reasons that we questioned it in the beginning is because even though HUD says it on its website, that does not necessarily mean that the state, your officer, your AI officer, is going to accept what HUD has said on their website. So some of us have been waiting to get some response from the state, and I don't know where we are in making
nowhere,
it.
really, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
And
other
so,
political parties outside.
I mean, you realize that's who we don't talk to HUD in Washington, because they don't matter to the people of the state very much. They kind of decide that how they're going to handle working with us as an entitlement community. So we have those officers at the state, and those offices have often been difficult for us to work with.
Now, I don't see Lucy Miller here for us today. However, I would suggest that we can facilitate a discussion with the HUD folks for our state to ensure that they can give us something.
Lucy has little or no influence over what happens in the yeah, Rich Hendershot is state, but really he doesn't either, because the AI is handled by a different officer, and Rich really can't tell her what to do.
It's Alva Lewis.
Right, but
Well, Alpha, it was Linda Sanford.
But Alva's, we have a
right, but to the point, let's find out who the appropriate person or persons or office is that could give the entitlement community something in writing that allows them to use this.
We
Which is
have
what we
that
asked.
letter. It's just a matter of, I can forward to you if there's a comfort level with the happiness of that letter. The other thing, Bethany, to your point is there's also, beyond the 22 entitlement communities, there's non-entitlement communities like Medina County. All the counties do conduct an AI if they want to access state funds. So the benefit is actually even beyond 22. But some, for whatever reason, there's various reasons why they choose not to.
The other question that I wanted to bring up is, I know that there were some data challenges or information challenges when you did your, I guess I'll call it your tour of the entitlement communities. Do you know, or do you feel comfortable now that those issues have been resolved for some of those communities, or will there just be a difference of opinion?
The fair housing survey that was conducted this time got a little lower participation rates than others we've done for other jurisdictions. This, I think, began with the reluctance of some of the entitlements to fully participate, so they didn't really distribute the survey. And then, of course, when it came time to have the public involvement meeting in their county, this survey wasn't well represented. And so if it were to be done again, it would just need more involvement of them sending the survey to their own stakeholders, with a little more rigor.
We've had also up front, we've said this is a benefit, and it sounds too good to be true, and people didn't even necessarily trust NEOSCC. I mean, they're like, well, what's an NEOSCC? Not that they don't trust us, but just, we're brand new, so us coming into this with this information. But over time, I think those relationships, that trust has been built. So at this point, I think it's a matter of it doesn't fit for us, or it's not detailed enough, or whatever. There are reasons why.
And is that what you've learned about these things that we've just been discussing? Is that part of your zillion-page documentation, or is this captured somewhere?
But it's kind of like almost like a lessons learned part. You're saying.
Yes, it sounds reasonably short. I think it would be informative for this conversation about what value has NEOSCC delivered to the community to date, and how do we continue those things that people have perceived to have value. And so it would be helpful to have, if you have it already, it would be great, but some documentation of these things that you've learned, so we know, okay, to Connie's point, a community might not have been able to participate because they didn't have the commitment up front. So we know in the future, if we can't get that commitment, it might not be that valuable. Or if we get a bunch of commitments now, do we need to do something to maintain them over time, so the next time this happens, we don't have to do a whole bunch of new work?
I think that's something we can include in, even the larger Vibrant Neo process. But yeah, there's some things that definitely, as we've gone through this, would be different, or I think up front would have been more helpful. But I think that we have a letter that you might be happy with.
I think we've seen the letter. I don't know when our AI is due. Well, it depends, because really it changes, and for people who haven't done this, who haven't had to satisfy these HUD commitments, it's easy to say, we have all this information, and this should make them happy, but it doesn't necessarily. And HUD looks at us individually as
If I may, a couple comments with a question at the end. I'm a non-entitlement community in Mahoning County. I found the fair housing analysis of impediments that you've done wonderful. It's not just going to your chamber or to your city stats and all that to gather your information. Now we have this tool with prepared so we can augment that information into our analysis of impediments on our local level. So I'm going to use this plan as my research tool, right? And pull in that information that you've done to represent my county. Now you have 48 pages specifically on Mahoning County, which I don't think I'll just grab it all and put it in there because we did our AI 2 years ago. So, and annually it has to be updated for our funds. So we're not at the beginning of the process, so I can't just adopt this AI. But I can use the information that you guys have researched so well and really brought it into an AI focus, whereas a lot of the other statistics were just that. They weren't geared towards a fair housing or the equitable analysis. So I think that in itself was a great outcome for NEOSCC for this program and HUD to, in their, what they wanted to get from this NEOSCC grant, you have provided in the fair housing document that you've created. My question is, I had submitted a letter regarding support and that we would be interested in participating with the AI or just adopting the NEOSCC AI from Mahoning County. But since we're 2 years into our AI, I understand that we're not eligible to do that. And
You could extend the life of yours maybe, because ours is a 5-year process, and for non-entitlements, I've heard both. I've heard 3 years, I've heard 5 years.
it's 5 years. They just changed it to 5 years. So if I'm in my second year of my AI and it's 2013, you're saying that we could extend the life to 2018?
Yes, and that's the letter for the non-entitlements. So the letter for entitlements was, I forget whoever Lewis's boss is. But if the language isn't strong enough, I mean, that's all. We're trying to give comfort to 393 jurisdictions. It doesn't always work. But for the non-entitlements, it's Joyce Hill.
Right.
And she wrote, I mean, I don't know if you were happy with that letter, but she was basically just confirming the same thing. If HUD's okay with it, or Fair Housing is telling me it's okay, then I'll
I think what
honor
I'll
it.
do is just augment my AI with the information that you pulled.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah, no, that would
the other
be,
goal from this whole
that could be good
process?
too.
And Anthony, why don't you follow up with those who have issues and questions?
Sure.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, because this is a two-part question. First, I guess, the overall process, you met with a lot of groups at county to county, and I know you did receive some input. Are you, in this overall process, I presume you've got a timeline for getting back to those individuals with responses?
It's not so much back to an individual responses as it is Rob's right now in the editing stages, and we're going to come back with the final version for people to look to see if the change was made. And Director Galucci made a good point. Is, you know, looking at Rob or looking at us in our process, is are you going to accept that edit or kindly, however you worded it, is, you know, just decline.
Well, some I know, it wasn't just a challenge of the data. I mean, I understand the issue about the Fair Housing Survey, the lack of representation, I mean, the numbers, but there were some methodological issues as well as some others. And definitely. I think it would certainly be beneficial to make sure that those pose those questions. I wouldn't say they were challenges, but they certainly were questions that there ought to be a response back to them regarding those particular issues.
If they're very
Clarification, if anything, and saying, no, this is what HUD. We do this index this way because this is what HUD wants. Okay.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So for the ones that are more specific and detailed, there would be a
Question on
and I know that
some methodological issues.
your jurisdiction had the area of opportunity question, and I was going to.
It was actually more than one index that would ask about.
Yeah, we were going to get back to
was in this overall process.
Has any of this been shared with the banking industry and get some input from them? on the fair lending and the fair lending practices and so forth? Basically it involves what they've been reporting they've been doing. So I guess as part of the overall process is saying, well, here's what the information is saying. Can you help explain that? Or if maybe before we even come up with, I'll guess, I know there's suggestions, but the ideas of what you're going to do, where the investments ought to be made, what the public policies, as well as the private sector ought to be made.
I think that's a terrific idea, and in addition to the banking industry, the real estate industry. So I think it would be good to follow up with those organizations to let them know what we've done and to review the data.
Okay.
Any?
I think two things. I can only remember one right this second. You mentioned at the end of what you said, Anthony, that there's going to be this, after everything's sorted out, discussions about what to do to implement or what this means for action.
Right.
So where and how are those discussions happening?
Right here, right now, and going forward. Through scenario planning, through the larger Vibrant NEO 2040 plan. This report is just that. It's a report that will be used by individual communities, but from our grant perspective, has to be part of the discussion going forward with our final deliverable, which is that vision, those policy changes. This AI process should help inform that. So, and that's what this slide is all about. And HUD calls it the bridge. You have the report. What are you going to do about it? And they don't say how the bridge looks or how it should be structured. And that's what we're.
And I think the important point there is that certainly our consortium, NEOSCC, will look to integrate the information into the rest of its grant activities, as well as beyond that, particularly looking at things like performance measures and goal setting, policies, etc. However, keeping in mind that the individual communities can choose to use the information independently or not use the information independently, and that what we're doing doesn't require them to follow through with our recommendations.
Let me suggest we pass this out, which is a summary of findings and recommendations. As the chair has said, many of the decisions that are made at a local level, not at a metro or regional level. But I think it would be important for you, as representing this body, to look through this and see, from your perspective, where could an organization like NEOSCC have an impact. We are already taking one of the recommendations around the relationship between jobs, housing, and transportation, and have boiled that down into mappable elements for the scenario planning. We identified, based on this work, this mismatch between transit lines and where jobs are, and asked our transportation consultants to identify the high-quality transit lines in each metro. High quality being the most frequent. And then we have we've identified zones around those transit lines of about 1,200 feet, which is the walking distance, and within those, the areas where there are vacant commercially industrially zoned land. You'll see in the scenarios having that talk about doing things differently, that one of the factors used to place development has been the proximity to the transit lines. So this is a practical way of bridging the recommendations from the AI into scenario planning, saying one thing we could do is to incentivize job locations along our transit corridors. There's about 8,000 acres of vacant industrial and commercially zoned land in Northeast Ohio, adjacent to these high-quality transit corridors. That's a significant amount of empty acreage, some of which is in small parcels, a fair number of which is in larger developable parcels. the point is to start using the findings from this and feed them into the scenario planning. There are a number of other recommendations that may best be dealt with through model codes, which this organization could address. We see a lot of issues regarding the definition of household in zoning and building codes, the definition of disability, the definitions of unrelated adults that tend to create situations that discriminate, particularly against disabled folks. So I think this is a boil down of that very thick document. I'd ask you to read it because I think it's really open to us as to decide what sort of interventions make sense. We represent a wide range of organizations, and I think that within each of our bailiwicks there are some opportunities around policy recommendations, around mapping, around recommendations on where business incentives ought to be located. We saw in Rob's work, but also in our scenario planning work, and the work we had done for conditions and trends around from Good Jobs First, that there's a very distinct pattern of incentivizing jobs away from transit lines. So it makes it difficult to get to work. And that's where the tax abatements are going. That's also where the SBA loans are going. And we did have conversations with the industrial brokerage community, some of the leaders there, asking them, do you ever consider transit access as part of your site location work? The answer is no. We'll give you every other factor, but we really don't measure that. So we're not providing any incentives or either in the private side in terms of these are things you should look to for labor force accessibility, or on the public side in terms of do you get any points for being close to a transit line when you get job incentives. These are some things we might want to think about that really come from the integration of this information and some novel and new ways of thinking about it. A lot of the rest of it is simply doing things that communities ought to be doing around their zoning codes and around their local building codes, and perhaps that's a role that we could play in providing some technical assistance on best practices in that area, as we're suggesting we ought to be doing in other areas of sustainability.
So, Hunter, I think you said a lot in response to my question, which I appreciate. If I understand correctly, there are a lot of topics that you and others have thought about as to ways we might implement, like your point about transportation being aligned with housing. The expectation is then that we will have full board discussions designed to reflect back on those specific topics. Well, I guess I'm saying is I think that you're not expecting us to have this discussion right this second because we don't have the information, right?
No. What we wanted to do, this is a capstone of this work.
Right.
Now, part of why we did this work, as HUD said, you got to do this work, you're a grant recipient. And we've done that, and we're doing it. And as several people have pointed out, we saw real economic value to the communities, and that might be an ongoing opportunity for business sector here for this organization. But we also saw this as an opportunity to ask some bigger questions about what's going on around communities. I think this is the boil down of the findings. I would ask you to look at that. I don't think we want to ask anybody to look through the telephone directory, but this really is the essence of it all. And where does this group see its role as collectively, and where do you see your role within your organizations and opportunities within your organizations to take this work, which speaks to the conditions of the region? I mean, we all find this in our own individual communities, many of these issues. These are conditions of the region. These are issues of regional significance. And I would also point out this ties directly back, in my view, to what matters to Metro's work. Because it ties directly back to those findings about the disparity, high disparity having a negative effect on economic prosperity. So these are some specific recommendations. There are probably others. I'd ask you to take a look at it, and I think to your point, as we move forward into the next phase of our work, we should have a board discussion about what are we going to do about this.
Just really quick, this is actually very short. I just wanted to say that my second thing that I did remember was that on the goals, the measurement piece, that and to participation in distressed areas as a way of measuring whether we're making progress on equality.
Well, I think that would need a discussion for everyone.
That's not, this isn't the time to have that discussion.
But that's good to bring it up again.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. And my question really was kind of partially answered by Hunter. I'm concerned about the mechanisms we develop to make sure that this bridge does become real, and we have the ability to understand how we're going to integrate this into the scenario planning process, and then what our expectations as a result of that moving out of that. So I would hope that we spend some time thinking about what does that look like, so that we all can understand it and buy into it and help to carry that forward.
One thing that I don't want to add to it is the scenario planning does deal with so much of the physical nature of Fiber Neo 2040, but there is the other components that are in the AI that need to be hit, and that's going to be this fun discussion going forward. Like, Rob finished it up here, and leaves with his expertise, but the rest of us are here to continue with this bridging piece. The AI wasn't really part of the bridging; it's part of the grant piece. So it'll be a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to, helping the board have this discussion.
I would just hope that as we make recommendations that the specificity is important, because you can go at a level of saying we want to incentivize businesses to locate near transit, but I would hope that we'd be able to identify particular grants or policy areas where that would actually be implemented, so the policymaker could say, not merely say generally incentivize that, but say here are the types of policies and where they're implemented, who the policymakers are that could specifically add, for example, points to a particular grant or a particular loan for a business that's located near a transit thing. So people have some guidance, because just giving out a goal of saying we want businesses to get closer to transit stations is fine, but it doesn't give a policymaker the direction so he can say, yeah, I can add points in this program or this loan or this grant program.
Yeah, I agree with you. With what we were trying to do here is to simply tease out whether it was possible to identify potential opportunity sites, underutilized opportunity sites along transit, as a way of seeing how robust that question was. And I think what we found in that level of analysis is there's a heck of a lot of empty land past which buses are going, and we're not. I know, having been planning director in Cleveland, we never really looked at opportunity corridors along bus lines in any systematic way, and I'm suggesting that might be an area for consideration. That would have to be done, I think, in conjunction with our transit agencies and our cities, the involved cities, to see that this really makes sense. But I think one of the things we're seeing is that there's an awful lot of empty land that's well served, and the jobs are moving somewhere else. So that poses a challenge to be addressed.
As the planning director of a transit agency in this region, I can tell you we have looked at the corridors that are well served by transit. We have 10 such priority corridors based on transit propensity, which is the number of jobs and population and density along our major bus routes. So we have identified those. The next step is working with the communities they are in and working towards planning stations and projects around them. We are already in contact with Northeast Ohio Team NEO to identify for businesses coming into this region where transit is. We have that information that goes before us, so we're working on it. The next step would be, and we've talked to the county about their placemaking, incentivizing that throughout the cities in the county.
And then how the other transit authorities in Northeast Ohio in our region could learn, or we could share information that's a benefit to our process. Nothing else? Thanks everyone for the time. We went a little over, but it's just a good discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the alternative scenarios open house content format and outreach. That will be the Sasaki team and Jeff Anderley.
Well, we're waiting for Chris Horn and Kat Keller to join. I just want to take this opportunity to preview the first slide, which will be coming up shortly. That has the overarching schedule for the open houses for week 1 and week 2. I want to thank everybody who has already gotten back to either Sarah or Jen Margolis in our office to confirm your availability to help staff those open houses and or serve as a subject matter expert. We have a couple of holes in some of the workshop dates, so we will be following up with you individually after today's meeting to make sure, if you haven't been confirmed, that you're confirmed. And if there are other folks in your organization that can possibly join and help out, we would appreciate that as well. The other thing that we are hoping to do between now and next Monday is to raise the number of folks who have RSVP'd for the open houses. We have slightly over 230 people already signed up for the 10 individual dates. And as we expected, because it is an open house format, folks may not feel the need to sign up ahead of time. We are anticipating sort of the same pattern of what happened at our first round, where people may not RSVP and they'll be there. So the open house format, which you'll see in a moment, has been structured to accommodate that. But getting back to the original goals of having the board bring additional folks and encourage people from their organizations and communities to attend is something else that we would like to put out on the table again. We have been following up with people both verbally via phone and via email, and sort of the same message keeps emerging. It's summertime. People's schedules are all over the map because of vacations and other projects that might be going on. So we encourage you to get the word out via your networks as well, to again just gently remind people that if they haven't signed up, that they should go to vibrantneo.org and sign up for the open house near them, and to also encourage them to bring other people with them. The format, as you'll see in a moment, is going to be very conducive to people doing what we call in open space technology, which is voting with your feet. Basically, people coming, getting interested, and getting information about things that are of most importance to them, and that's okay. We really want people to give us feedback and input on things that are of interest and things that they know something about. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chris Horn and Kat Keller.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I see slides on your screen. Did you want to switch control over to my end, or?
It's on your end. You should have.
Let me double check.
Okay. Looks like Julie is still the presenter.
Chris, I'm changing you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so and I have two monitors. Can you see? Should be able to see the open house schedule. Is that?
Yes.
You're okay?
Yep.
Okay.
It's not coming up on here though.
Great.
Oh wait, one second, Chris.
I'm sorry, was there a question or comment?
No, the title slide is still showing.
Okay. Okay, so, well, hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is, as a reminder, the schedule for the open house sessions. And this is an updated floor plan, and this is very thematic. Each of the rooms will be a little bit different.
1 second, Chris. We're still trying to get the slide up.
Oh, okay.
Should be.
It's the presenter. It's weird.
Let me try something.
Julie, can you come up? Sorry, this isn't my laptop. It looks like it's on a holding slide because it's showing up here, but not showing up on the screen.
I don't know what that means. Wait, maybe. Is it open multiple times?
I don't know.
Okay, now it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was where you started. Are you good now? Yeah, I'm not sure what that was about. Okay.
Okay, Chris, it looks like you are on the screen.
Okay. Try to put this in presentation view. Can you see the schedule now?
Yes. Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. All right. So this is the open house schedule. And this is the updated schematic floor plan layout. Things to note: the welcome. We have the welcome table at the front with a couple of welcome boards, and I'm going to walk through our most up-to-date draft of all the boards that we have. So you'll be able to see the actual content for all of this. So these will just basically frame the process, frame the activities of the open house, the staff, the welcome table, help people get oriented. We have a video that's in progress that will be moving on the screen off to the side, as well as refreshments. And then we have one section dedicated to summarizing the scenario planning process, thematic stations around the room, in outward migration, open space environment, development, community character, transportation, people, jobs, physical health, and as well as just an overall summary of the outcomes across all of the scenarios. And we have writing tables. We're going to have Imagine My Neo up, as well as boards summarizing the results of the initial period, the first data pool that we conducted, as well as a photo booth and brown paper and markers for people to write comments. So before jumping into the board, I wanted to show you the latest design for some of the engagement activities and some of the feedback at the different stations. So in terms of format, we're looking at a couple different things. The dial-like gauges, which I'll show you in a second. There's a kind of a place type preference survey. And then obviously we have the brown paper on the table where people can write comments, general feedback cards, and then photo booth and Imagine My Neo. So for several of the stations, we were envisioning and have designed what we're calling dials. So these would be, we print 4 of these on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. And these are, and basically, you would see an issue, like transportation is represented in this example. And this format kind of lends itself to themes that have kind of direct trade-offs between two extremes of the spectrum. So not all themes lend themselves to that, but in this case, this is that transportation did. So in this case, you're looking at a dial with a set of options, and one extreme would be complete investment in just auto-oriented infrastructure. Spend 100% of all your funding on car-based infrastructure, and then on the other extreme would be spend 100% of your funding on pedestrian, bike, and transit infrastructure. And we want people to take a pen or a marker, which we'll have at the station, and draw a line representing their own personal view and their priority. And as reference, we have the values for the scenarios in the black dial, the kind of hands of the clock that you see. So, and the scenarios are somewhere in the middle. So in this example for transportation, you see the trend scenario, which we were calling a bit usual previously, and grow the same, which we were previously calling alternative 1, are more on the auto side of the spectrum, and the do things differently and grow differently, previously named alternatives 2 and 3, are more on the transit side. And we're also going to have examples for people, just like an example, like you can post some example cards as if somebody had filled them out just to show what we're asking for, and also show the fact that it's okay if somebody wants to draw their line even more extreme than what the scenarios are. And so this is going to be really helpful for us to design the preferred scenario, because we can use the existing scenarios as a frame of reference. And that material will be, so keep in mind that these cards, these dials, will be at the thematic stations that match them. So they will have just seen the transportation boards that lay out the different systems that are represented in the scenarios, what some of the impacts are, what some of the key themes are, what some of the major trade-offs are, and then they'll get this card and they can fill it out. So if they put their line even further over to the right towards the walk, bike, transit infrastructure, then we can interpret that as saying they want something that's even more aggressive in terms of its investment in public transit, bike and walk infrastructure than even the two do things differently and grow differently scenario. And we also want to have a section for comments and an area for attendees to write their zip code. And we would collect these by location. So when we're summarizing the information, we would be able to say, who said what at which event. And these are, so we're envisioning using the dials for 3 different stations. So the first is transportation, which you just saw, and this shows the other 2 stations where we wanted to use it. So the first is would be in the outward migration section. So the 2 ends of the spectrum are basically, pure greenfield, build outward development versus redevelopment, inward infill, reinvestment, etc. And again, the scenario set kind of falls somewhere in the middle. People could be even more extreme if they want to in either direction, or they could write their draw their preference somewhere in the middle. And the other card here is about environmental regulations. So on the one end of the spectrum, you have build anywhere you want, just totally loose, minimal federal compliance essentially. And then on the other end, you have aggressive environmental protection. One thing I should note is that the language on these is final, so we haven't done final pass through or anything like that. So there's keep that in mind. But if there's suggestions about wording, that's also very helpful. And there's another implementation of this dial concept. It's a little bit different. So the 3 shown previously are basically weighing in on a single issue on a single spectrum. And then this set of dials, and what you're seeing on the left is the actual card that people would get, and the 2 images, the one in the middle and the one on the right, are just zoom ins to help you see them better. So it's not 3 different things. Just one card that would have 3 dials on it. And this would be in the community character station, which basically is going to be talking about, what kind of place do you want to live in, or do you think Northeast Ohio should be investing in, which kind of development, and similar to the other stations, they'll be presented with information about that, scenarios. And one of the activities of the station is basically you design your ideal community, and we have 3 different dials on the card. So one is about cars versus bicycle and pedestrian, and this is meant to be neighborhood scale, by the way. So we're not including transit on that per se, but it's more about the urban design of kind of a local area or a community. So the first dial is auto versus bicycle and pedestrian. The second is essentially about density. We're using the same language that we used in the first workshop series, which we felt was successful. So we were saying dispersed on the one hand and compact development on the other. And then the third dial is asking about mixes of use. So all residential on the one hand versus mix of residential, retail, and commercial on the other. So similar mechanism as the other one. People would just draw their line somewhere along that spectrum, and this information would be very valuable in creating the preferred scenario, because then we can understand what the development type that the attendees want to see, and what those mixes are like. There's also we've also designed a kind of overarching survey feedback questionnaire so which you see on the left, specifically about the scenarios. And so, the first section is asking on a scale of 1 to 5, how will each scenario align with your vision of the future for Northeast Ohio? So you can rank each of the 4 scenarios, and then there's space below to write comments. And then we're referencing the second section back to the themes that are each of the stations. So which of the elements matter the most in evaluating the scenarios, and you can mark as many that are relevant or fill in a blank for other. Very important, what is missing from the scenarios, which things did this person not see in any of the scenarios that they would have liked to see, and then again asking about zip codes. And then on the other side, we have the participant survey, and very similar to round 1. So just asking basic identifier questions, gender, race, etc. So, and then this shows you again the room layout with each of the activities assigned to it. So the outward migration has a dial, open space environment has a dial, the place type preference survey has the set of 3, transportation has a dial, and then the overall feedback is over here towards the scenario summary. So that's an overview of the actual feedback mechanisms, the design of the activity. Next up, I wanted to walk through the boards in their current form, but I wanted to pause for any questions or discussion about the activities.
Are there any questions? Yes, there is a question, Chris.
Okay.
I guess I'm just wondering, by the nature of the questions, it would seem to me that you're not likely to get a lot of people coming to this event that are very big into development anywhere and kind of a laissez-faire approach to this. So are the questions really going to get you the kind of valuable information that you're seeking? If you get, I mean, I would think by nature, people who are coming to these meetings are concerned about the way development's going. So if you ask them, do you want to develop anywhere or in environmentally sensitive areas, you pretty much know where the results are going to come out. So how do you do analysis with that kind of data?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think that we need to acknowledge that it's not, it's not like a traditionally designed kind of statistically valid survey per se. I think that all of this information, all the activities were created with the boards in mind and the material in mind. So it would be, I think, it would be challenging, maybe impossible to do the kind of traditional statistically valid sample methodology without having someone go through this experience. So we view it as a trade-off that yes, there could be some tendency that is not representative of the population perhaps, but on the other hand that it's very contextualized in the event itself, the material that we're showing, and presumably the responses are coming out of an education process. So we're hoping that they don't just walk up to a table and pick up something and just start drawing on it. There will be staff at each of the stations that can engage the attendees, talk to them, frame the issue a little bit, look at the board, and then they can fill it out. But it's definitely into consideration. I think it's something we have to bear in mind, and particularly when we're looking at the responses and summarizing them and trying to convert that information into a preferred scenario, we have to be on the lookout for that sort of thing and be mindful of it.
And I also think too, the example that I'll give you that probably helps frame it in terms of when we talk about voting with your feet. We've talked to some home builders who have weathered the downturn in the housing market, and their question to us was, well, which workshop should I go to? And it's for one builder, he's interested in 5 of the 12 counties, or maybe 6. He is going to bring his people because they want to make sure that their interests are represented, and more than likely they're only going to go to the meetings where they actually have holdings in those counties. And so I think as we're trying to engage people who typically aren't engaged in these kinds of activities, I think you will see uneven feedback in terms of the volume of feedback, because a person who's a home builder may be just really interested about densities. They may not have a bigger interest in some of the other boards. So again, to Chris's point, this is not designed to be statistically significant. It's designed to give people an opportunity to talk about their preferences for things that are important to them. And so, I would just caution us in understanding that as we collect the data from people, you won't have somebody showing up at every one of those stations and giving equal weight to what their feedback is. So in that regard, it is sort of a more preference and things that you are more likely to care about versus taking them through a survey and they would answer every question and none of the above. Because people, they're going to give you feedback on something, they're not going to turn the card in and say, I don't have any feedback.
Patty, I think one of the other things I know when we were doing the Imagine My Neo, we tried to make sure that there was a range of choices that ran from as wide a social political spectrum as possible, particularly around land use issues,
right,
where some people want very high levels of regulation and other people want far less. And I think to some degree these cards reflect the extremes deliberately, because we're attempting to make sure we're not building in a bias of, well, of course everybody wants X. Well, not necessarily. This is a very complex and diverse area, and there are parts of our region that have no zoning and are proud of it, and that's fine. There need that voice, which is a low regulation private property rights voice, needs to have a place on that spectrum. And I think I see some of that. Is that one of the things that, as you guys work this through?
Well, I think that was, and Chris, you can jump in here too, but I think that was the whole premise behind the dial, so that people do have a range and it is one extreme to another. And the idea is that if you want something that's in the middle, you draw your arrow in the middle. If you want something that is extremely on the other end, that's one of the things we want to make sure we do as we are gathering these cards, because if you remember, we did have some participants at the first round of workshops who didn't want to give feedback. And for their voice to be heard in this, they're going to have to pick something. They can't just not draw on the map, because that's not a data point. It's basically, opting out. And that's not what we want to encourage. We want to encourage people to give us that range. And again, trying to keep everything organized by workshops so that we can attribute that to those particular parts of the region.
Right, and this is also part of the logic of asking for the zip code was that there's a lot of ways in which the feedback may be uneven in various ways, whether it's because of political ideology or whether it's because of age or race or location or any number of things. And so at least with the geography, it's something we can say, oh, we got a lot of feedback for this list of zip codes. But for these other ones, we didn't get as much, so we have to be careful maybe about assuming that transfer some sort of feedback from one place to another, or at the very least be mindful of it. And I would also add that, from my perspective, it's sort of, given the stakes of participation and how important it is, I would think that almost this is a way to entice people to attend, is to say that, we're not structuring this a way where we're going to go out and knock on every single door and call every single house. So this is your opportunity. Here it is. It's happening. If you care, if you want your voice to be heard, show up. This is important. And if you do show up, your voice really will matter. It really will count. And we will take it, and it will be used to inform the preferred scenario. So it just kind of raises the stakes a little bit for people to actually come and participate.
Any other questions before Chris continues? Bethia?
It looks like you made a purposeful choice not to have feedback on the People, Jobs, and Fiscal Health Board. Can you just say why?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I think it's really a function of the material being shown, and I'll show the boards a little bit later in the presentation. But we felt that there wasn't as clear of a kind of spectrum-like trade-off that we could identify there. it just didn't, the material is a little bit different in nature from all of the other ones, and it doesn't quite lend itself in quite the same way. And so we were even considering folding that material into the scenario summary and not having a physical people job station at all, because it's more about kind of general socioeconomic trends, projections, and physical impacts. So that's where a lot of the physical impacts, some of the thematically specific physical impacts appear in other places, but the kind of high level, like, revenue cost ratio, that sort of thing, that appears in the jobs and physical health. And so we debated doing one about would you want more people in the region if in theory it could happen, or do you like it the same size as it is today, or something like that. And when we ultimately decided we didn't think that was made sense to take a dial of that, but it was really driven by the content.
Okay, and it sounds like we'll look at the content and we can maybe talk more about it then. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Could you go back to the outward migration slide?
Do you have a question?
No,
Mike?
that's the area I'll be working in next.
Okay, and that's a good question, that there will be an opportunity for everybody who is participating as either a staff person, a consultant team member, or an in-kind resource to go through the final presentation on Monday from 10:30 to 11:30 remotely. We will be getting that information out to everybody as these materials are being finalized. So everybody will have a simple task. It looks, the diagram is, there's a lot going on there, but it's been structured so that you're standing at your station, it's very focused, very repetitive, and again, we're not going to assign anybody to a task that isn't something that they don't already have the subject matter expertise to talk about, or the ability to engage people who are coming up to that station.
Just a quick comment on the feedback dials. I really like the format. I will tell you, and I don't know if this is just because it's on a computer screen, it was not immediately clear to me that the things on what I'm seeing as my left-hand side were the grow the same, and the things on the right-hand side were do differently. It might be just a function of, it being on a computer screen and me not seeing the actual piece of paper.
Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, good to know. Maybe we can do something graphically to enhance that, make that more clear.
Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Chris.
All right. Switch over here to boards. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the current draft of the boards, and they're fairly far along. We're getting close to showtime here, so not a ton of time to change direction, but I will say the same thing that I said about the feedback mechanisms, that there are placeholders in certain places. There's the layout, the exact layout, something we kind of leave to the very end, so if things aren't lining up, just go through and address all that. And some of the text is still placeholder, particularly towards the end, but a lot of it has been combed through and revised, and so this should give you a really good sense of what the actual content is going to be, what the images are going to be, what the indicators are, the intent, and all of that should come through pretty well in looking through these. So the first couple are the introduction boards, and so this board is basically welcome to the open house. Fiber Neo is the project. This is what we're doing. This is the goals of the project. We're looking at scenarios. There's stations around the room. Walk around, give us your feedback on these various topics. Look at the comment cards. We have the graphic on the right that summarizes the different kinds of activities that people will be doing. So staff at the welcome table will also point that out and welcome people and mention that. And this is just one of the kind of intro welcome orientation boards. And we also designed a second board, which is just kind of gives an overview of the overall process and acknowledging that this is event 2 out of 3. One of the events already occurred, and there's a little bit of a summary at the top of what happened at that event and what we did with the feedback. We also have subsequent boards at some of the stations that show in more detail what the information was that we got and how we used it. this just acknowledges from a process standpoint that we did have that meeting. You know, there's some photos at the bottom. It points out where we are today in the process and where we're going for the remainder of the timeline. So now those are the intro boards. The next sequence of boards appear at the scenario introduction station. And so we thought it would be important or useful to have at least one board that just talks about what scenario planning is, why we're doing it. So you know, on the left you have this kind of diagram for generally speaking how are the scenarios built. You know, you make these assumptions, you create these different possibilities. We'll need to change the names on those. That's something that an example of something we haven't gone through and edited, but showing the impacts and showing where we are today. So we're looking at the results in that flow diagram. We're looking at the results of the scenarios, you know, asking what do we value, what do we want to avoid, what's the best way forward, and then moving toward preferred vision. And basically, you know, this makes the point that they're learning tools. We're not trying to predict the future. We're trying to test a range of plausible scenarios to understand the impacts of different assumptions. They're based in reality, so this is just wild speculation, that especially the trend is based on facts, based on historical trends, and very data rich. And third, that this frames a little bit about what the intent of the activity is, that we're not picking a winner, but we're using the scenarios to learn and we're trying to get feedback about them and combine elements from the scenarios and add elements that may be missing to pull all that information together and create a preferred scenario. And this board gives the summary of the concept, the matrix idea that has appeared on previous presentations, but the names are now different and the order is kind of switched around. So apologies that it might be disorienting at first, because I know we show this in a different way, kind of the bottom flipped up to the top, but trend is, so basically the way this works, we wanted this to be kind of more consistent with almost like an algebra XY axis. So, you know, you have your do things differently along the bottom, the x-axis, and your growth on the up and down the y-axis. And so, you know, bottom left you have your trend, which we're calling business as usual. Grow the same at the top left, that's what we're calling alternative 1. Do things differently, bottom right, alternative 2, and grow differently at the upper right, alternative 3. And we maintain this pattern on any of the boards. Like if we ever lay out four maps, we lay them out in this pattern. If we lay out statistical summary, we lay it out in this pattern. We want to try to keep it consistent. But having said that, you know, and I think this is something we've talked about before in previous meetings, but the goal, we know that it's a lot of information, and we know that it's hard, even for us, to keep track of the scenarios, exactly how they're different, what went into them, and you know, the goal is not to present this in a way that we reasonably expect people would walk out of the open house, and if you quiz them, they would say, you know, you said, what do things differently, and how is that different from the same? Like, we wouldn't expect that people would be able to answer that question upon exiting the open house. The goal is more to use the scenarios as a vehicle to look at specific issues, specific trade-offs, and get people to weigh in on the issues and weigh in on the trade-offs, and that's what we want people to remember. But we do need to kind of present this in an organized fashion to a certain extent so that the scenario results are intelligible, but at the same time we're not expecting that everybody is going to like completely get this 100% remember and retain it upon first glance. That's unrealistic. But these are the summary of the scenarios. We have a board that just shows for any of the maps that people see what the colors are. This is very similar to a slide that we showed in the first workshop series. And then we have a range of boards that show current conditions as well as the overall land use snapshot for each of the scenarios. So and the format is the same for each. So you know, there's on the bottom below each of the maps, and then a summary of population, employment, and open space for each of these. So this is 2013, and then this is what the scenario boards look like. And we decided just to show the new development. So we felt it was a lot easier to read the map if we toned back the current just for the new over top bit. So similar layout, you see the four scenario matrix on the side, and the scenario light up. Then you have the land use summary there at the bottom, which you can compare to today. People and jobs, a couple bullet points about what's going on within the scenario, what the assumptions are. And then on all the boards, one of the things that we've done is put this kind of red bar coming out from the margin that's essentially a takeaway box. And we wanted people visually to kind of scan the board from the top, the title, and then, draw their eye down the board to the bottom, see that takeaway, and then put the content in the middle. So this is just kind of highlighting some of the issues that we talked about and presented on in the first workshop. What are some of the key issues for the trend? Outward migration, abandonment, and the expense associated with new development. And these are all issues that we go into in greater detail at each of the thematic stations, but this is kind of their first glance at what the scenarios are generally. The trend scenario, the grow the same scenario, and we know the text is trailing there. We need to reformat that text box, but that just repeats the text that's in the four scenario matrix. Same convention, and this there was a comment we got. May have actually been at the last board meeting where somebody pointed out that we're making different assumptions about population and employment in different scenarios, so it creates a challenge to try to compare them and for people to understand that. And so we thought that was a really good point. We wanted to make sure whenever we show them and when we compare them, we want to provide that summary information. So for example, these will all be next to each other. So if you're looking at trends, you see the little stick figure and the briefcase, and then you flip over to grow the same, and you can see that there's a lot more people, there's a lot more jobs. And then this gives a summary of what goes into it, and a summary of some of the outcomes of the scenario at the bottom. Then we have a board mixed in that shows the workshop 1 results, and we have the combined the majority chip placement. And so whatever color you see on the map is majority occurrence of a game chip. And we have a little description of this down below, how the exercise worked and what it was what the patterns were. What did people say? What were the dominant themes? And then we also have some of the other themes that were sticker based, but people could draw the maps in public transit, the roads. And the point being here, and this is something we can try to call out. This is maybe a text box on this board, but basically just to say that the first two scenarios, and these are based on trend policies. Then the two on the right are largely based on the feedback that we heard in the first round of workshops. So this is the do things differently, the low population and employment, but with the different policies, largely based on workshop 1 feedback, formatted before. And then this is the growth differently scenario, the high growth with different policies. Okay, so that's the sequence for the scenario introduction. And next up we have the sequence on outward migration. So this was obviously a big theme the first time around, something that we feel is a very useful and constructive way to frame a lot of the issues and frame a lot of the data that we're collecting from the scenarios and a lot of what's happening on the ground. So, so this is kind of the first board of the sequence. What is outward migration? What are some of the consequences? In this board, we really want to point out the connection between outward migration and abandonment. is the density of infrastructure, and then over top of it is abandonment. So you can see that it basically occurs in the same place. So it's something we view as a real lost opportunity and something that is used to frame. Was there a question?
No, keep going.
Okay. And then along the bottom, you see a summary of the fiscal impacts in terms of new development. So, for example, capital costs for new construction, annual O&M costs, we should probably specify for new construction as well, demolition costs, and added revenue for new development. So the fiscal model looks at everything, including servicing currently built communities. We're trying to just look at what are the fiscal impacts of the new development itself across the different scenarios, and we kind of group these relative to outward migration. So trend and grow the same are in this blue box. These are the scenarios that are largely driven by outward migration. And then on the right, you see do things differently and grow differently, which are incentivize reinvestment and redevelopment. And then next up is, this is a format that we repeated across each of the themes. And so this is the kind of trade-off, point-counterpoint kind of format that we came up with. So on this one, you see, on the one side, what happens when we build upward. On the right side, what happens when we build inward. So there's a diagram that shows what that means. So you see the legacy community here on the left. There's already abandoned lot, 2040, another house abandoned. That person moves out to the new community, and you see this kind of lower density car-based development. And then on the right, you see a repetition of the same diagram. So, but in this case, the gap is actually filled in by a new house, and then one of the building gets taller for redevelopment. So it's sort of, this is a device that we use kind of throughout the board sequence on these trade-off boards. So, we have a little sort of made-up quote, showing each side of the issues. Otherwise, they will afford a home with a large yard and quiet suburb away from the city versus I have roots in this neighborhood and I'm happy to see it thriving again. And then adding some of the information below that, what are some of the impacts of each of these things? Increased supply of suburban small houses with lots of open space, opportunity for new community formation, requirements of infrastructure, abandonment risk, etc. We tried to be as balanced as we could and try just to state facts for each of these. And then of course, you have the takeaway here at the bottom. And then we have another board that shows basically the settlement patterns in the scenarios. So where are people moving? So essentially it's a population heat map, and you see the legend again repeated just to give a little bit more context to understand the amount of population growth in the different scenarios. And the blue represents loss, and the yellow and orange represents growth. And these images are now real. They're not placeholders. So you can see that the differences are actually pretty dramatic across the scenarios. And on the right, we summarize new development according to 3 different categories. So redevelopment is the darkest purple. Infill or adjacent development, which is within 500 feet of existing development, we symbolize as the light purple. And then we're saying leapfrog development more than 500 feet away from existing development, the green. And pretty significant difference between the different scenarios. This is the beginning of the open space, environment, and agriculture sequence. And on this board, it's again a similar kind of pattern and flow as the previous set. So this begins by kind of framing the issue. What are we talking about? Why is this important? Talking about some of the environmental assets and some of the functions of high-value ecological areas, the significance of agriculture to the region, and then we have impact on the different categories of land. So acres of impact on land of high ecological value, acres of new and impervious land cover, and each of these boxes represents the 4 different scenarios, so you can see the amount of spatial impact that's occurring in each of them. And then on the right is the impact on prime agricultural land. And then we add additional information below. What does it mean? What does high ecological value mean? What is impervious land cover, why is it important? And what is prime agriculture land? And then on the bottom, we have a summary of energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, obviously placeholders, that provide a little bit more information about the different scenarios. And then on this board, we wanted to show the different networks, like what were the moves that the previous board showed kind of impacts spatially and in terms of resource consumption. But on this board, we wanted to show the spatial patterns of the conservation moves that were being made. So on the right, you see the different conservation network patterns. And there, I understand they're a little bit hard to differentiate, seeing them at this size, but when you print them out at full size, they're actually quite a bit different, especially when they're all right next to each other. And then we summarized. Provided a quantitative summary of the map on the left. And we debated about this image because, so basically the way it works is we have urbanized space in brown, rural residential in yellow, parks and conservation in dark green, unbuilt color in sort of gray-green color, and then agriculture all the way on the right. And you can see that there's the changes are kind of in the 1% to 2% range, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but then actually if you think about what that really means, it's quite significant. So at the bottom, we just said, additional 1% may not seem like a big deal, but it's actually, that's the size of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Actually, it's bigger than that. So 38,000 compared to 33,000. So the charts aren't radically different, but any difference that you see is very, very significant. And the other thing I should mention is that below these maps, there's a summary of the principles that were used to generate the scenarios from an open space perspective. So what were the strategies for trend and growth theme? And then what were the strategies to do things differently and grow differently? And this is a trade-off for open space environment, and we were specifically looking at, we framed this somewhat broadly, but within the scenario, one of the things that we incorporated for the do things differently and grow differently scenarios were a set of hydrological regulations and riparian corridor protection, specifically framed around water. So we're basically looking at that this is marking that dial with the environmental regulation versus development. So increased land supply, tax revenue, but then you're building on ecologically sensitive areas, flood risk. This bottom graphic shows a similar kind of spatial impact graphic as previous. As I've shown previously, except this is showing the spatial impact near water bodies. So this is a thing that the grow differently, the do things differently and grow differently scenarios were created to prevent. So this shows for the trend and growth scenarios what are the actual impacts. And then on the right you see the kind of counterpoint to this and little graphic that shows what it is that we're actually talking about. What are the buffer areas? What are the regulations? How do they work? Why are they important? set this up as a sort of looking at what it's like to grow in a dispersed fashion versus growing in a more compact fashion, what the major implications are of each of those development patterns. And we also, right now, are creating a series of boards that represent different place types that follow the quality connected places categories. And they basically summarize each place type and say, this is a legacy downtown, this is what it's like, these are some pictures of it, and then we're designing an activity for people to register their reaction to it. So, is this the kind of place that Northeast Ohio should be investing in? Maybe yes, stickers, yes, no stickers. We're talking about how to set that up, but basically kind of a visual preference survey concept, except that we're talking, it's not just about the architecture itself, it's actually about kind of a place type, a community character, and all of the things that entails. So that's not only design, but walkability, commuting patterns, accessibility to your neighbors, all those sorts of things that we want to touch on all those boards. Okay, and this is the transportation, first transportation board in the series. So, this is one of the trade-off boards. So, auto-oriented development versus public transit and walkability-focused development. And so we have the two different networks being depicted here. So the one on the left is the one that appears in trend and grow the same scenarios. On the right are the do things differently and grow differently scenarios. And then we also are planning to put some of the high-level transportation indicators at the bottom of this board. So vehicle miles traveled and number of non-auto trips per scenario. And then we have another board that looks at the transportation trade-off, some of the benefits of public transportation, some of the costs. So we have a list of kind of high-level benefits that result from creating public transit. We have some of the costs here on the right, and we have a road cost figure by way of comparison. We also have some additional information below that provides kind of comparisons. Really, the question is about investment. So, we heard in the first workshop series people were very interested in investing in public transportation, and so we want to show, what are the benefits, but let's also think about the cost too, and you still want to invest in it if you fully understand the cost and you fully understand how that compares to other types of investment. So we want to provide the information necessary to contextualize that choice. And we also wanted to pull out we're creating, while we're working on the housing and transportation and H+T index for the different scenarios, and we've talked about potentially pulling out just the transportation cost for this board, because the housing can change as a function of other factors. So it's not necessarily related and maybe somewhat misleading, but would be helpful to be able to understand that, okay, it has a cost, but it also has all these benefits, one of which is the lower transportation cost, which we can actually quantify with the scenarios. And this sequence of graphics shows, and it's very much underway, but shows the basically it's job density, and then the height of the bars represents job density, and then the color represents its accessibility by different modes of transit. So, for example, one color would be not within a necessary distance of any transit mode. And so, for the trend for scenario, for example, or especially grow the same, you have a lot of suburban development and no increase in public transportation funding, so you're going to get a lot of development that's going to be in that one color that just basically means it's out there, but it's not accessible by public transportation. So the more colors then that come up, for the other scenarios, we'll show you the increase in accessibility. Okay, so, and this is the jobs and physical health sequence. So, scenarios, obviously a big part of this whole process was the physical impact model, and what are the cost and revenue implications of the different development pattern scenarios. So we sort of built this around, there's two boards that show all the scenarios together, and this is really framed around the revenue to cost ratio, which we still feel is kind of the marquee takeaway indicator. Out of all your revenue, out of all your costs, what's the balance between those two? And so we go through, we kind of introduce this visual convention at the top, and then we have for each of the scenarios we give a snapshot of what's happening. So on this one, you can see the trend scenario, and there's this jump from the average is there on the left of 2010. Actually 2010, 2011, we need to change the labeling on that, but that shows essentially current day in a 40-year project. That's, I'm sure, feel different, but today's numbers, and then you see the jump between today and 2040 in trend, and we also need to relabel that as trend, not BAU. But you see the different dots represent the counties, and then you also see the average there in as a kind of dashed line in the middle. Well, not quite in the middle, but that shows you the difference visually. And then on the right, you see a summary of what's going on. So, negative physical impact across the region, declining revenue compared with cost, and then one of our headlines from the first workshop series, the most physically strong county in 2040 is weaker than the county today from the revenue to cost ratio perspective. And then some explanation of what's causing this, why is this happening, what are you seeing. So that's trend. And then we have the same pattern for each of the other scenarios. So you see the jump, the relative jump across scenarios representing, when you go from all on the left for growth themes, and you're moving around on this matrix, you can go from the bottom row. What does it mean to go from the bottom row to the top row? How much better do you make that jump? So this jump here below actually shows that quantitatively. That's how much better it gets within our model. And then on the next to that, you can see kind of moving in the other direction. How much better does the picture get if you don't have growth, but you change your policy? So then we've shown below that the arrow representing the jump from the trend up to the do things differently scenario, which suggests that there's actually much more that can be done through management, policy, and sensitization than pure job growth and population increase. And then the third scenario shows what happens when you combine the two of them. So, I realize this is very, very small. So you probably can't see it, but it has a little bit of a bump up from do things differently, but it doesn't have the jump that you saw from BAU up to growth things is not the same jump you see going from do things differently up to. So it just shows the different outcomes, summarizes them, and then talks about what some of the drivers are. And then this is the last set. This is where, in the room layout, we wanted to give people the kind of overall scenario reaction feedback survey. And so we wanted to have this kind of master chart in front of them, so they could just look across each of the scenarios. What are the basic facts? We also had another page essentially that we would line up next to this. So it would be one long sequence. So we look at population, employment, growth, housing units, abandoned units, urbanized area, linear miles of new infrastructure. We just tried to pull out some of the headline impacts, some of the headline indicators. indicators and then just lay them out in a kind of visually palatable way that people could kind of get a quick snapshot, compare across, so that when they're filling out that card, they actually have some easy frame of reference. Because we know that that's a lot of information, and if they just have that sheet of nothing else, it would probably be pretty hard to remember. Something thought about. Also have, it's fairly hot off the presses, we have the results of our first data pool for Imagine My NEO. So we have the sequence where first we give an introduction to Imagine My NEO, what is it, and we'll have it live there. You know, we don't expect that a ton of people will take it we'll use it at the open house. That's fine. Some people will be interested, especially after they look at these boards, and they probably want to do it. And there's probably also a lot of people who will come that have already played the game, gone online and gone through it, and want to see what the results are. So the first board just gives a summary of how it works, and then this board starts to get into some of the results. And I think this may be the first time you're all seeing this, so I can pause here for a little bit to look at some of the results. One of the things that we were honestly a little bit surprised by was that the priorities, which you see on the left, and these are all of them, they're all the possible priorities that you can select. Clean air, water, and land, one. And we have the total star votes, and then the kind of composite stars from the whole region's response, and you represented it as a single snapshot of stars. What would it look like? Followed by jobs, followed by recreational opportunities, and some of the ones that we put in, like the fewer local development and zoning regulations. This is very much the comment earlier. Came out very, very low. And we also listed over here on the right any priority that, and we group these by county. So for any county, if there was a priority that was in the top 3, it appears on this row. So that's why there's less here than there are here, because in order for an icon to appear here, it has to have been in the top 3 somewhere. And then you can see which counties ranked it as their number 1, number 2, number 3 priority. So we thought this was pretty significant. The clean air, water, and land. Not only was it the highest among all the priorities, but for 10 out of the 12 counties, it was number 1, and for Wayne, it was number 2. For Stark, it was number 3. Pretty significant. And at the bottom, we also did a summary of the different policies and projects, and too small to read over there, but we gave people the option of the thumbs up and thumbs down and neither. And so we were representing both the thumbs down and the thumbs up votes. Mixed use, and we ranked them in terms of the thumbs up votes. And these were fairly close, more close than the priorities, more close than the projects. So, read into the ranking with a little bit of caution, but mixed use development came out number 1. Jobs, major development, and key services near transit was number 2. Regionalized service provision was number 3. And generally the thumbs down kind of follows the thumbs up too. So no big. We were curious if people would kind of know both things differently than we were voting them, and it seems like they were generally matching. And then the projects are on the right, and we normalize those by total potential amount of coins that could be given. So it's not just a straight vote or not like a straight count, because like transit, for example, you could spend all 15 of your coins on. For agriculture preservation, you could only spend 1 coin on that. So if you just summarize it by coins, so we normalize it as essentially a percentage of the total points that could have been spent on that category. And so cleaning up vacant and abandoned properties was number 1 by a pretty significant margin, and then there were several kind of in the middle, and then lower local taxes and prioritizing new infrastructure were very, very low at the bottom. So we thought that was pretty interesting. This is the all of the responses, I believe, as of last Wednesday night. But the tool is still up, measuring is still up, and still record data, but we just had to make a kind of a hard line data pull so we could actually summarize it for the workshop. So this will be one of the boards. That's everything. Yeah, so those are on the board. Questions, comments, reactions?
Gene?
I think the boards are really attractive, and I think they summarize the data really well, present it in a very understandable way. The underlying premise of growth or no growth, I guess I still don't quite get that. I mean, it seems like we can't control that. I mean, growth or no growth, I choose growth. But I get the alternative scenarios, but the growth or no growth, how do we articulate how we move in that direction or how that's going to happen?
Did you hear the question, Chris?
I did, yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and this is actually, incidentally, that's kind of a really good way of answering the earlier question about why didn't we have an activity for the job and physical station. That's exactly why we didn't have an activity. It felt a little bit like it was strange to ask, sort of, do you want growth or not? Kind of obvious. But I agree with you. I think that most people would pick growth. So that's why we didn't have a dial for that one. I guess, we want to acknowledge that, there's sort of some things within the policy realm that can be influenced with policy, can be influenced with investment and incentivization, and some things outside of it. And we've kind of, for the most part, I think, tried to focus on, when we're calling out themes and we're asking people to weigh in on them, I think we try to prioritize things that were within that realm of policy and regulation influence. We include the other information, I think, just as a way to see if there might be unexpected consequences of if you increase the population of jobs, does one policy still perform as well as it did under flat growth? And there's kind of varying results for that. And just to make the point about, the way we did try to structure the fiscal section was basically saying that, from our perspective anyway, we often feel like there's a little bit of a silo effect where, you have your economic development conversation on the one hand and you have your planning and policy discussion on the other hand. And we really wanted to kind of combine them and say that it's not just ag jobs, but that helps somewhat when you go from the middle chart, or the chart on the left. The chart on the left shows what happens if you just add jobs to people, and you do get a benefit. But that really we're trying to make the point, I think, that you kind of need to do all of those things. Some of the population growth is certainly outside the control of the people responding to these things, and just structural, outside of the control of the region even. We acknowledge that there's quite a bit that is within the control of the region, is the purview of policy, and definitely want to get that in there, and also acknowledge some of those broader effects that may be outside of that immediate kind of realm of control.
Well, and I would say, when you showed these boards last board meeting, I think one of the things that's really struck me about the board that's growth without doing things differently is that idea, and I think you were just saying this, that if we as a region grow all the jobs that we think we can grow, even if we don't have direct influence over that, we're still in a lot of trouble fiscally. And so these land use questions aren't something that we can grow ourselves out of, which is a little bit different than what you were saying, which is what influence do we have over that? But I think that there's a point there that even in an optimistic scenario where those folks who are doing their best to drive up business attraction and population growth in the region, meet all of their goals and then some, we're still in a situation where our fiscal health is not good. And then, to the other discussion we were having before about whether or not there's a question here, I don't know that there is a good dial question. Mike Lyons and I were talking about, whether there's a question about seeing the impacts of growth, should we be focusing on local strategies, regional strategies, or I guess the middle point would be both. But I don't know if we're giving folks enough information about the underlying pieces around, how growth patterns have really been moving jobs around the region rather than attracting into the region. So I don't know that we have enough context for a question like that, but that would be the question that I know I would be interested in understanding if people, where people's priorities are on that point.
Other questions? Rachel?
Yeah, I noticed that all the maps are of the large 12-county region. Are they going to be pulled into the smaller sub-regions at the workshops to show more detail, or is that the way it is?
We're sticking with the 12 county scale for this one. There were layout challenges visually, but also time implications for this one. So it was for the first round it was times 3. So we're sticking with the 12 counties for this one.
Other questions? Bethia?
I noticed that this is Bethia, I noticed that you put the agricultural land use component with environmental piece, which makes sense. I'm really interested, I don't know if you have a number that you can pull out, in understanding what the economic impact is of a decrease in available agricultural land. If that question makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. We haven't done a calculation. We've looked at the impact and we've differentiated it based on what NRCS is calling high quality agriculture, but that's actually more based on soil conditions than it is economic value. But I think that it would be, I don't know that there's time that and get it into scores. We can certainly take a look at it, but I think even if we can, I think that makes a lot of sense and it would be very valuable information to provide.
Okay, great, thank you. And then just really quickly, I agree that visually they look really great to me. On the one where you have the summary with, that one. When I look at it, I find the comparisons on the population and employment to be hard from line to line just because there's so many. I don't know if there's an option to put a grid with the same number of boxes and then fill in the people on each one so you can also see the blanks, if that makes sense. I found the ones from, with the lower, like from population growth 2010 to the right to be easier because there's only between 1 and 10. But that, the visual impact of the ones that look more harder. It's not a big deal if it can be done.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we actually, each unit, I realize is labeled, so in its current form you wouldn't be able to tell this, but they actually correspond to a certain value, real numerical value behind these.
Yeah.
We could potentially break that, and it would make it easier to read, but it actually kind of touches on an interesting topic that is something that was pretty challenging actually in all of this, which is when, if you say things in terms of net new or change, the differences are pretty pronounced between the scenarios. And so we've tried to do that, generally speaking, to show the differences. But when you actually contextualize it against everything, current plus new, the differences aren't as significant. So it's like looking at the two columns on the left is almost, that's like looking at everything that's there plus the new, and then it's actually kind of hard to tell the difference.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a challenge, but maybe it'd be easier to read if we broke that convention and use less symbols, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
Any other questions? I think that's it, Chris.
Okay. Great. Thank you, everybody. I flip control back over.
You okay?
Yeah, Chris, before you go, this is Grace Galucci. I just wanted to reaffirm what Jean Nixon said, that I think the boards are very attractive, and I'm particularly impressed with the scenario summary. I think it's an excellent way to communicate a lot of complex information so that the average person can understand.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. We're excited. We think it's going to be we're thinking it's going to be really fun. We're looking forward to it.
Just have one question. Just real quick, looking at the do things differently scenario in the housing units. How are we adding 459,000 new units and only abandoning 2,400 versus a trend scenario where we're adding 276 and abandoning 179,000? I mean, I see a net of 100,000 for the trend and a net of 450,000 new housing units on growing the same but doing things differently. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so a lot of the, without having the numbers in front of me, I'm thinking that some of the new housing is is redevelopment, so tearing down old house, rebuilding over top of it, so it's not being built out at the edge of the urbanized area and counting as an abandoned unit and leaving one behind. So there's some replacement going on. I'm not sure if that accounts for the entire difference, but I'd be happy to look into that and give you the full story of exactly what's behind it.
Yeah, just like to understand how that math works, because to me it just seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Other questions? Everyone's going to be, Sarah, right? We're going to send out the links to this later today?
For the boards?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was, it confirmed with Sasaki that they'll be posted.
Chris, what time will we be able to send out the link to the posted boards today?
Within the next hour. Yeah, I'd say within the next hour.
Okay. So you have something to do tonight, right, everyone? Anything else before I switch back over to us? Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kat, if you're still there. Slides down here. Wow. Okay, there we go. So we are about 2 hours and 20 minutes into the meeting, and I know we said we would extend the meeting till 4. So I just wanted to start off by thanking you for spending the extra time with us today. I promise the next couple updates will go fairly quickly, although there are some important things for us to talk about. And with that, I did want to give a personal thanks to all of you, because I know over the last month we've been having you push Imagine My Neo and push the open houses, and I'm sure a lot of you are creating a Jeff folder in your inbox just for missives from me, but I greatly appreciate the follow-up on that. Relative to what Patty talked about in terms of outreach, we are in the 230s, 240s in terms of attendance so far, so we would like the board to do that little bit of extra work this week to reach out to people. I know that I've sent to probably about 25 of you a customized email to send out on your behalf, and you'll recognize it because in the subject line it has your name, Rachel McCartney, please use. So hopefully you will get that out in the next week, and as well as perhaps follow up with some of your contacts to ensure that they come to the upcoming events. We do have extra postcards available as always, and the online tools are all there. Thanks to a couple organizations that really have gone the extra mile in putting us in their newsletters on their websites. et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to draw your attention quickly to two new pieces in your packets. One of them is called The Opportunity of NEOSCC, and the other one is called NEOSCC by the Numbers. And these two pieces were developed in the last couple weeks to really help further define what it is that what we are and what we're not. As you know, there have been a lot of different challenges about what we are doing and what we are up to. And so we're hoping that these new pieces help to spell out a little bit more succinctly what it is that the opportunity of this initiative holds for the region, and certainly some of the things that we are not involved with. The second piece looks at kind of our outreach metrics over the last year and a half relative to attendance at our workshops, meetings, workstream members, press, publicity, advertising reach, and there's some pretty impressive numbers in there in terms of people that have picked up on our stories, have visited our website. I think we've had 19,000 visits to our website since we launched it in October, which we're pretty proud of. And we'll have better numbers around the Imagine My Neo engagement tool coming up at the workshop, but I can tell you that we just earlier this week we went over 1,000 participants from the region. So we have probably another 150 or 200 participants from outside the region, but we hit a milestone earlier this week from the 12-county region. So if you have any questions about those two pieces, the second piece, of course, will be updated as we go along, and our engagement and outreach continues. A couple of communications updates. We just found out this afternoon that we're going to be featured in the Canton Repository. Is going to include a letter that Hunter penned talking about the business as usual case or the trends scenario, and inviting people to the open houses, which is great because we've struggled a little bit in Stark County, and I think it's going to help drive attendance next week or in 2 weeks. We have been having meetings with some of the congressional delegation from Northeast Ohio. Grace and Hunter and I are meeting with Senator Brown's staff tomorrow. We met with someone from Senator Portman's staff 2 weeks ago, and we're beginning with, I think, Representative Renacci at the beginning of August, and we have a couple other meetings coming up after that. As you know, promoting the open houses, promoting Imagine My Neo remains top task. We're going to do the final data draw from Imagine My Neo on August 17th. We have a makeup session on the public opinion poll on July 26th at 10 a.m. And I mentioned to Hunter that it's very interesting that a lot of the public opinion poll results really mirror some of what you saw today on the Imagine My Neo results in terms of priorities for the region. And lastly, I did want to mention we got a lot of interest in the Imagine My Neo tool from different schools and different teachers. Particularly, we've been out at these festivals, and we're going to work on a strategy that will allow them to use it in their schools to at least learn about some of the impacts of some of the priorities and some of the choices. Since the school year is launched after we do our final data pool, a couple of them are still interested in using it as an educational tool going forward. So, questions? Joe?
I'm sure you've discussed how to pull some of the results from the Imagine My Neo into this scenario. Is it?
Yeah, and that's something that Sasaki's working on for the preferred scenario, since we weren't able to pull them the first round until I think we pulled it on July 18th. So, yeah, it was last week, Wednesday. And interestingly enough, we are doing pretty well geographically with participation in Imagine My Neo. A couple of the counties are underperforming a little bit. Cuyahoga County is, of course, overperforming. But is Janice still here? Ashtabula County has actually doubled their participation to their percentage of the region's population. So we've got a great turnout from the folks in Ashtabula on the game. So, other questions?
I have a comment.
Okay, Chris.
Just for the gentleman earlier that asked about the housing count, I just checked on that, and actually, it's a type of I think it's a really good catch. We haven't, is not correct. It's actually way, way lower than that. So not to worry, we are still reviewing and inputting that information. So we'll make sure to double check all of those, but that is not the actual number.
Anything else? We are going to be publishing and putting online the new video for the round 2 open houses, which is about a 3.5 minute video. And if people want to use that in order to educate people and your networks about what these open houses are all about, it'll be up probably later today or first thing tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we have Sarah Meyer with progress and status of the products.
All right. Well, as Patty mentioned before, the PMO and Cobalt are working very hard to try to get the open houses staffed appropriately. So in that vein, I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet for some of the remaining slots for the week 2 of the open houses. So take a look at it, sign yourself up or staff up if you have not yet already done that. And it is 2 pages long, so there are slots on the second page. It's just for those 4 meetings that are in the second page. And also, just as an update for the open houses, every consortium member has been reached out to in some way, shape, or form, email or calls asking for participation. Currently, we have 2/3 of the consortium members are committing staff or board members to actually work at the open house. So we'd like to get that up to 100%. Okay? And then, all right. So the products, I'll just be very brief today about this. You all know what the products are. Let's see if it'll move. Okay. So just a summary of work accomplished since the last board meeting. The dashboard working group has been refining the proposed indicators, measures, and visuals. And we were going to present on this here today, but given that we've been running over on board meetings so much, actually since we started, it's not a new thing, we're moving this to a webinar. So the webinar is at 3 p.m. on Thursday, July 25th, so just here in a couple of days for those who are interested. And if you look in your board packet, there's also the instructions on how to register for that webinar. I do want to note that the time was changed to 3 p.m. from 1 p.m. There's an APA, American Planning Association webinar on the Coons takings case that's happening at 1 p.m., so we moved ours. The HUD Flagship Sustainability Indicators webinar, which was a makeup from the last board meeting that was held in the last couple of weeks as well. Toolkit and best practices. There was a working group teleconference, and you saw the presentation for the regional AI as well. The public comment period did close on that, so work is underway to finalize that. And policy recommendations, Kelly's been working quite a bit actually with Cobalt and trying to get the open houses up and running, but has been doing double duty, going back with doing the policy recommendations and working with Joe McDonald as well to make sure that there are ties back to the dashboard. And the draft will be presented in August of the policy recommendations, likely as a webinar as well. And pilots, Julie had the pilots update webinar, and then currently the pilots list, the existing and proposed pilots, is up on Glass Cubes. You all have access to Glass Cubes. If you've forgotten how to get into Glass Cubes, that's also in your packet for on the products update sheet. So I think it's about the 3rd page in. So just go to Glass Cube's website and you can figure out what your password is. And so just the update of when presentations will happen. The asterisk means that it's going to be webinar presentation to save on time, since we do have a lot of information that we're throwing at people on a regular basis. So you can participate if you're interested. The major presentations will be occurring in the fall with all the working groups, with all the work culminating with the preferred vision. And just a look ahead here, I'll leave that up while I have some reminders. We covered the dashboard. The Envision Tomorrow training, which board members got invitations to this for their GIS staffs to participate. There's limited number of seats. The Envision Tomorrow training is an opportunity to have staff have Fregonese show you how to use the scenario planning GIS software. And it is an all-day training on August the 2nd. There are still some spots available for that, but again, it is limited. We are in the GIS lab at Cleveland State University at the Urban College there. So if you have not RSVP'd for that yet, please do. RSVPs are due by Friday. And then we are also holding a webinar of the first hour of that presentation for people that maybe aren't going to be practitioners of the GIS, but are just interested in how the scenario planning process works on the actual painting side, a little bit more in depth than what we've gone over here before. Leverage match is due for anyone that has not turned that in thus far. Also, please make sure that anyone that is participating in the open houses, that gets recorded as well, just so that you get credit for it. And there is a training opportunity, as Patty mentioned, for the open house volunteers on Monday. So that'll go around with the board's information too when we get that from Sasaki, the online gallery for the boards. And I believe that is it. Moving on to the August objectives. Are there any questions that I could answer? Okay. All right. And on to August objectives.
You got the sheet of the August objectives. Obviously the first part of the month is absorbed in the open houses. We're going to keep Imagine open until August 17th. Be publishing the final version of the AI this month. As Sarah said, there are a number of upcoming webinars to be scheduled. The calendar is there, and then somewhere at the bottom of the activities by group. So I think the green sheet gives you the punch list of things to put in your calendars.
Next on the agenda, we have the Executive Committee update. The Executive Committee met on July 9th, and we met on 3 matters. First was the Futures Committee, and we decided that it was appropriate to accept the recommendations of the officers relative to the formation of a Futures Committee. Our facilitators who worked with us on the retreat had recommended that we have a committee of 6 to 8 members. However, because it was important to ensure that we had a good representation of the various organizations that are part of this consortium, we outlined what that would look like, and we decided that 12 members was appropriate. So we wanted to ensure that there was representation by the MPO and COGS, by the fund, RPI, the counties, the municipalities, the institutions, the nonprofits, both in the service and the policy area. Thus, the Futures Committee consists of myself, Bob Now, Joe Hadley, John Getchie, Bethia Burke, Bill Curran, Peggy Carlo, Ed Jurse, Freddie Collier, Gene Nixon, Brian Corbin, and David Beach. I have contacted all of them. They have all accepted the position. We are currently working with the staff to negotiate the final proposal from the facilitator, and we hope to start having the meetings beginning next week and bringing back to the full board a recommendation at the September board meeting. And if there's any other interim exercises that should involve the board, we would bring that back as well to the August meeting. Any questions or comments? Next, we have the policy for endorsement and or presentations of other regional initiatives. Again, both the officers as well as the executive committee discussed the matter, and considering the function of the organization and particularly the time constraints that we have during this board meeting, it was recommended that any or all organizations who would like to present to the NEOSCC board will have 5 minutes as part of the public comment period to make a presentation, and are welcome to disperse any materials and offer follow-up to the board. So that is the decision there. Am I being
swarmed out by the rain?
Yeah, by the rain. Okay, any questions or comments on the endorsement or presentations to the board? We thought this would be a nice balance of giving people the opportunity to present to us, but yet at the same time ensuring that we maintain the majority of our time for the actual board work. Okay, and then lastly, we discussed consortium membership. The primary purpose of this item coming up was Lake County had approached us for a seat on the board, and initially I believe they were wanting a seat during the formation of the organization, but did not have the funding and some other challenges. At this point in time, the executive committee has agreed to extend the offer to Lake County to join the board at this time, and they would be able to use NOACA's overmatch in order to fund their participation. In regard to any other organizations that would present themselves to be a part of NEOSCC, we decided that it would be best addressed as part of the Futures Committee. And so Lake County really is the only one at this point that was kind of a holdover, and we agreed to give them a seat at the board, so we would have 34 consortium members. They have been actively involved, even though they have not been officially on the board. And again, we will consider the issue of adding board members as part of the Futures Committee. Any questions or comments? Okay, then on to the next item for information. We do have the full executive committee report for more information on the items I discussed. We have technical steering committee attachment. There was no business conducted for the finance committee, nominated committee, or personnel committee, and the communications and engagement committee report is attached. Is there anything that staff or the committee chairs would like to highlight out of those reports? Okay, hearing none, then we move on to the next item. Relative to the organization, we also have the financial report, contract update, and the leverage match report attached. And again, if staff or others have any questions or comments or would like to highlight anything. Hearing none, moving on to old business. Any old business? Any new business?
Well, the only new business I would say is I just got a storm track warning that says we'll have severe thunderstorms in the AMATS area of Portage and Summit County until 4:30. Thank you, Jason.
I saw there was hail in Ohio City earlier. It's all over the region.
Okay. So then in terms of the August watch list, Hunter, do you have something you'd like to?
No, it actually appeared really
Yeah.
twice on the agenda, so you got that in front of you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Open discussion? Hearing none, I call for an adjournment. Do I need we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Second? All in favor? Meeting adjourned?